I still remember the chill of that evening air against my skin, even though we were indoors. The estate lights glowed like something out of a movie chandeliers hanging low over polished marble floors. Everywhere I looked, there were glasses raised, sequins sparkling people laughing too loudly, because wealth gives them the illusion that everything they say is worth applauding. It was Morgan's 30th birthday, and I, Alex 32, a financial consultant who spent years climbing without shortcuts, was seated at the long mahogany table, feeling oddly like a guest at someone else's show. Morgan's family had gone all out, of course. A private chef string quartet waitstaff in crisp white jackets. They called this place the Hawthorne Estate, a piece of property worth nearly $2 million. The house was less a home than a monument. Then came the toast. Morgan stood champagne flute in hand, smile bright and confident. At first I thought it would be the usual thanks to friends gratitude for another year, that sort of thing. But instead, Morgan's voice cut across the table with a certainty that still rings in my ears. Our children will carry only my last name. Alex's is too weak, too poor. I will not let my heirs be tied to that. The words landed like shards of glass. For a second I thought it was a joke. Surely it had to be. But the silence that followed was not sympathetic. Then came the laughter, the approving nods from Richard and Victoria Morgan's parents. Someone down the table muttered, "Smart choice," and a younger cousin held up her phone to record. I saw the little red light blink. The moment was captured, immortalized, destined to travel far beyond those walls. I gripped the folder sitting in front of me, bank statements projections for a client meeting the next day. My knuckles turned white against the paper. All I could think was how fragile dignity feels when it's dangled like bait in front of an audience. Humiliation has a strange rhythm. First, shock your ears, buzz your chest feels empty. Then comes the loneliness, that heavy quiet where you realize no one at the table is on your side. And yet you must perform composure sit still while everyone else pretends it is just harmless banter. I forced a smile though my jaw ached. Across the room, glasses clinked. To legacy, someone shouted. To the Hawthorne name. The music swelled again. Chatter filled the space as though nothing outrageous had been said. I, however, sat stranded in my own silence. The bitterest part, I had given Morgan 6 years of my life. I had built savings, paid down the mortgage on my Boston condo, worked nights and weekends to build credibility. I thought we were partners. But in that instant, I understood to them. I was merely a placeholder, useful until the real business of family pride could be celebrated. What they did not know, not yet, was that their triumph was already beginning to unravel. I would explain later. This part matters. Tell me where you are watching from, and do not forget to subscribe. We need to talk about families, money, and the weight of a name. After the party, the night air outside the estate was colder than I expected. My car sat at the far edge of the driveway, tucked between rows of luxury sedans that belonged to Morgan's relatives. I sat inside for a long-time engine, off watching the windows of that $2 million house glow against the darkness. From a distance it looked warm, but from where I was sitting it looked like a cage. The next morning Morgan came to me with a smile, as if nothing had happened. I had barely finished my coffee when the words landed. Daddy and Mom have agreed to pay the entire bill for in vitro, close to $100,000, but only if our children take my name. Morgan said it casually, as though the humiliation at the party was a minor misunderstanding, easily patched up with money. I stirred my coffee, listening to the spoon scrape against porcelain. I wanted to ask, and what do I bring into this family besides my savings, my career, my years beside you? But I knew the answer, they valued none of it. Morgan leaned forward, hand brushing mine. This is practical, Alex. The Hawthorne name opens doors. Your name doesn't. Why should our children start life burdened? I managed a nod, though every word felt like a nail hammered into my chest. Outwardly, I agreed to think about it. Inwardly, a storm brewed. I kept remembering the way Victoria had smirked when Morgan made the toast. I remembered Richard's booming voice. Now that is a legacy worth protecting. As though my existence was a blemish, they were all too eager to erase. That evening, I opened my laptop, scrolling through my email. Nestled among bank notices and client inquiries was a subject line that caught my breath. Hawthorne Legacy Dinner Confirmed Guest List. It wasn't meant for me. I was merely copied by accident. The email described a private celebration scheduled for 2 weeks later. The text was nauseating. We'll raise a glass to the future heir of the Hawthorne line. No mention of me. No acknowledgement that half of that heir would be mine. I closed the screen quickly, but the words burned behind my eyelids. I walked around the condo that night, touching the edges of furniture I had chosen the walls. I had painted the documents I had filed away so carefully in the cabinet. Everything in that place had been earned, not inherited. And yet here I was being told that my name, my entire history, was a liability. Sometimes betrayal does not arrive as screaming or slammed doors. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silk, delivered with champagne and polite laughter disguised as practical. By midnight, I found myself standing by the window overlooking the quiet Boston street. Cars passed headlights flashing briefly against the glass. I made a silent vow I would not let them turn me invisible, in my own story. What they didn't know was that I had already paid the clinic's deposit from my own account. What they didn't know was that cancellations, if made within a certain window, carried a full refund. What they didn't know was that I had started making plans. But I'll tell you that part later. I spent the following week in a state of uneasy quiet. On the surface, nothing had changed. I went to work, I returned calls, I met with clients who trusted me to guard their savings. But under that calm exterior, every word from Morgan replayed like a cruel echo. Your name is weak, your legacy has no value. One evening, when Morgan had gone out to dinner with a friend, I pulled the folder from my desk drawer. Inside were the documents from the fertility clinic deposit receipt appointment schedule consent forms. My signature sat neatly at the bottom, black ink on heavy paper. I traced the letters with my finger, realizing how much of myself I had already committed. It wasn't just money, it was hope. And yet in that house, I was treated like an afterthought. A few days later, another reminder landed. Morgan had posted on Facebook a glossy photograph taken at the estate with candles glowing in the background. The caption read, "The future Hawthorne heir is on the way." Hundreds of likes poured in, relatives and old classmates commenting with heart emojis and congratulations. My name was nowhere in that announcement, not even a hint that I existed. Friends began messaging me privately. "So excited for you two. Didn't know you'd already started." I didn't reply. I couldn't. How could I explain that I had become invisible in my own partnership? I felt the humiliation like a bruise that kept deepening, but something inside me had shifted. I was no longer just hurt. I was watching, listening, collecting. That weekend, Morgan invited me back to the estate. Richard wanted to show me something in his study. He handed me a glass of whiskey, then opened a drawer. Out came a folder worn with age, sealed with a notary stamp. It was a draft of his father's will. "Do you see this?" he said, tapping a finger against the yellowed paper. "It states clearly inheritance passes only through the Hawthorne name, no exceptions. My grandchildren must bear it to claim their future." That is why Morgan is right. It is not personal, it is tradition. Not personal. I forced a tight smile, though. Inside, I wanted to laugh. Tradition was just another word for control. They wanted my cooperation, my silence, my surrender. I left the estate that night with the weight of history pressing on my chest. Driving back to Boston, the city lights flickering ahead, I realized the betrayal was no longer private. It was official, documented, justified by signatures and seals. They weren't just dismissing me, they were erasing me from generations to come. At home, I stood in the kitchen staring at my phone. The deposit refund window was still open barely. The thought of it sat heavy in my mind like a key waiting to be turned. What they didn't know was that every insult, every smug smile, every public dismissal was becoming fuel. And once the fire caught it, would burn quietly at first, then all at once. But that reveal comes later. The night before our clinic appointment, Morgan was sitting cross-legged on the couch, phone in hand, humming with excitement. An ovulation calendar glowed on the screen, every detail highlighted and color-coded. "Tomorrow is the first step toward our family," Morgan said, as if the path had already been paved. I watched, quietly nodding when expected. Then in a voice softened by feigned agreement, I murmured, "You're right. The Fleming name is weak." I used my own name like a dagger against myself, though it cut Morgan deeper than me. Their eyes lit up, mistaking my words for surrender. "I knew you'd see reason," they said, leaning closer. But reason had nothing to do with it. Revenge did. At dawn, Morgan was already at the vanity makeup brushes, scattered like tools of battle. A tailored outfit hung waiting by the closet. "First impressions matter," they insisted. "Even if it's just a consultation, the doctors will see we are serious parents." I sipped my coffee slowly, masking the calm satisfaction that thrummed beneath my ribs. Because 3 days earlier, while Morgan was asleep, I had called the clinic. "Hello, this is Alex," I told the receptionist. I need to cancel Friday's appointment. She asked why. I answered simply, personal decision. Her voice was professional, neutral, yet tinged with sympathy. Since you are within the cancellation window, we can process a full refund of $3,500 within 5 to 7 business days. Would you like the confirmation call directed to you or to your partner? To Morgan, I replied smoothly, they handle our finances. That was a lie. Morgan had never touched the account. When I hung up, I felt a strange calm wash over me. It wasn't victory yet, but it was the first deliberate crack in their perfect facade. Back to that morning, Morgan left the condo radiant perfume trailing behind like smoke. Don't be late, they warned, clicking, shut the door. At 8:45, my phone began to explode. First came texts, where are you? Then calls one after another vibrating across the counter. Finally, a voicemail. Morgan's voice shrill, frantic. The doctor says you canceled. Tell me this isn't true. Alex, answer your phone right now. I let it ring. I let it burn. And when the moment felt right, I typed a single message. Maybe someone with a weak name shouldn't be wasting strong money on your legacy. Good luck with the Hawthorne dream. Then I powered off the phone. I walked into work that morning as if nothing had happened. Clients greeted me, documents waited on my desk, the city hummed outside. And yet in the quiet of my office, I allowed myself a smile. Because humiliation, when turned inside out, becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. Later that evening, when I turned my phone back on the screen, lit up with chaos, 70 messages, dozens of missed calls, voicemails filled with rage, threats bargaining, and back again to rage. Even Richard had left a booming message. Young man, you have disgraced my daughter. People at the country club are asking questions. You will hear from our lawyer. I replayed that voicemail twice, savoring the irony. All this fury over an appointment I paid for. Over money that was mine. The power had shifted, and they didn't even know it yet. Saturday morning arrived with a knock at my door. At first, I thought it was a delivery. But when I opened it, I found Richard standing on my stoop in a tailored coat, his wife Victoria beside him, pearls catching the morning light. And behind them, Morgan eyes, red makeup, smudged but chin held high, as if still determined to win. Alex, Richard boomed, pushing past me into the condo without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. I let them in. They didn't belong there. My place was modern, modest, filled with things I had bought, piece by piece, not inherited antiques. Their presence felt like oil spilling across clear water. Richard planted himself in the center of my living room. You humiliated my child in front of the entire clinic staff. Do you realize people at the country club are asking questions? The Hawthorne name is being dragged through the mud. I folded my arms, leaning against the counter. Dragged through the mud by a cancellation I paid for. Victoria's lips tightened. Don't be petty, Alex. The point is perception. You've embarrassed us, and that damage will take years to undo. Morgan stepped forward, then voice trembling between rage and plea. Why would you do this to me, to us? I told everyone. I posted it. You made me look like a fool. I almost pitied them. Almost. Instead, I walked to my desk and pulled out an envelope. Inside were the clinic receipts, bank transfer statements, the contract signed in my name alone. I laid them neatly on the coffee table like cards in a game of poker. This, I said, tapping the paper, is reality. My account, my decision, not yours. Richard's face flushed. This is outrageous. We will sue. I raised a brow. Sue me for canceling something I funded. For taking back money I earned. You're welcome to try. Silence pressed into the room. For once their confidence cracked. They were not used to resistance. They were used to obedience wrapped in gratitude. Morgan finally whispered, You could have just told me. I met their eyes. I did. You just didn't listen. The room felt heavy with unspoken truth. They hadn't wanted a partner. They had wanted a prop. Someone to nod to pay to stand quietly beside them while the Hawthorne name soared higher. But that morning, with the envelope lying between us, I knew they finally saw me, not as weak, not as invisible, but as a wall they could not pass. They left soon after Richard slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Their anger trailed behind them like smoke, but it no longer suffocated me. Because in that moment, I understood something vital. Humiliation is temporary, but control that once taken back is permanent. And I was just getting started. The condo felt lighter after they stormed out. I made myself tea, sat in the quiet, and realized I had reached a turning point. They thought the battle was over. To them, I was just licking my wounds, maybe regretting my defiance, but in truth, I was already sharpening the next move. On Sunday, while Morgan no doubt raged to friends and drafted long posts for social media, I began packing. Not the obvious things, no suitcases by the door, just documents, personal files, a few boxes of clothes. I moved them piece by piece to a colleague's apartment across town. I didn't want Morgan to notice before the time was right. By Tuesday, half my essentials were gone, tucked away safely, where no one could touch them. I slept better, knowing each step distanced me from the estate's grasp. Meanwhile, the scandal online was snowballing. The screenshot of my text, maybe someone with a weak name shouldn't waste strong money on your legacy, had been posted, retweeted, mocked, dissected. Some called me cruel. Others applauded me for standing my ground. Memes popped up overnight, my words pasted over images of ancient castles, crumbling statues, even family crests. Irony had a way of traveling fast. Morgan tried to spin the story, posting a long explanation about preserving tradition. But it backfired. Comments flooded in calling them entitled elitist, out of touch. Strangers wrote things I had been too polite to say. The world was doing my work for me. Still, I wanted more than online satisfaction. I wanted closure. So I scheduled a dinner, not at a restaurant they would have felt too comfortable. I invited them back to the estate itself, their own stronghold. Morgan was hesitant, but Richard saw an opportunity to regain control and agreed. That evening I walked in carrying a leather envelope. Victoria eyed it immediately, suspicion, flickering behind her pearls. We sat in the grand dining room, where humiliation had once been served with champagne. This time I was ready. Richard cleared his throat. I hope you've come to make amends. Not exactly, I replied, laying the envelope on the table. I slid out a set of documents, the deed to my Boston condo. I watched their expressions tighten as I explained months ago. Morgan had signed a cohabitation agreement, believing it gave them partial claim. What they didn't know was that a lawyer friend had advised me to draft an amendment notarized quietly that ensured sole ownership remained mine. In other words, I said, tapping the embossed stamp, you were never part of this. You thought you were building security here. You weren't. You can't touch it. Morgan's face paled. You tricked me. I met their gaze evenly. Number, I protected myself. For once, Richard had no booming rebuttal. Victoria looked down at her hands, and Morgan finally looked small in the very room where they had once declared me weak. I gathered the documents, slid them back into the envelope, and stood. Consider this my last appearance at your table, I said. I won't be erased from my own life, and I won't carry your name to do it. The silence that followed was sweeter than any toast. As I walked out into the night, the estate lights behind me, I felt the clean weight of freedom. Revenge wasn't a scream nor a slap across the face. It was the quiet certainty that they could no longer touch me. And soon enough, everyone else would know it too. Word travels differently when wealth is involved. For ordinary people, gossip might stay among neighbors or friends. But for the Hawthorns, every whisper became a headline at the club, every rumor a thread on social media. By the end of the week, the story wasn't just about a canceled clinic appointment. It had grown into a full-blown scandal. The local news blogs caught wind first. Financial consultant refuses to fund partner's legacy project. Then the bigger sites picked it up, eager to feed their readers tales of privilege unraveling. By Monday, Morgan's face was splashed across articles under headlines like, When Tradition Becomes Entitlement. Comment sections overflowed with strangers debating our lives as if they knew us personally. The estate, once the pride of Richard and Victoria, became a backdrop for ridicule. Guests canceled events booked there. One corporate retreat pulled out after employees joked about staying at the House of Humiliation. Revenue dipped. Richard, who had always bragged about the estate's profitability, was suddenly on the defensive. Morgan fared no better. That Facebook post about the future Hawthorne heir was screenshotted, shared, and mocked mercilessly. People pointed out the arrogance of declaring lineage while erasing the other parent. Hashtags popped up: weak name, strong money, Hawthorne heir. The internet had turned my quiet rebellion into a viral spectacle. I should have felt guilty. Instead, I felt relief. For years, I had been the quiet one, the agreeable one, the partner who nodded through family dinners, while my own contributions were dismissed. Now, for the first time, people saw what I had seen all along. Their pride was a mask, and it was cracking. In private, I moved with precision. I transferred funds into secure accounts, updated the locks on my condo, and finalized a new lease for office space closer to downtown Boston. My life was shifting piece by piece toward independence. But I wasn't reckless. I knew they might try to strike back legally. That's why I had gathered proof copies of emails, recordings of conversations, the notarized deed. I had enough to defend myself in any courtroom and to embarrass them further if they dared to challenge me. One evening, scrolling through Twitter, I stumbled on a video clip taken at the birthday party, the moment Morgan had declared my name too weak. The caption read, "Entitlement has a face." It had over 500,000 views. I watched myself in the background of that video, sitting frozen folder clenched in my hand. For the first time, I didn't feel shame. I felt recognition. Strangers saw it. They saw me. The Hawthorns had wanted legacy. Instead, they had infamy. And I, the one they tried to erase, had become the quiet center of the storm. But storms, I knew, don't end neatly. They scatter debris. They reshape the landscape. And when the dust settled, I intended to be standing on higher ground. Weeks passed, and the noise slowly dulled. Scandals, even sharp ones, eventually fade from the headlines. People find new stories to gossip about, new names to chew on. But for the Hawthorns, the damage lingered like smoke that clings to fabric. The estate once boasted of its exclusivity, now it stood half empty. Events that had been the pride of Victoria's calendar were canceled. Richard, who had never once known the word apology, found himself explaining to investors why the family's reputation was sinking. And Morgan, well, Morgan had gone quiet. The social posts slowed. The captions grew defensive, then disappeared altogether. As for me, I settled back into a life that finally felt mine. My condo in Boston became a sanctuary again. Every corner spoke of work earned, not favors owed. I walked through its rooms at night with a steadiness I had never known before. The savings I had protected grew. Clients still trusted me. My own name, weak they had called it, felt stronger than ever. One evening, I drove out toward the estate, not to visit, but to see. The gates loomed, but the lights inside were dimmer now. I parked at a distance, stepping out to breathe the autumn air. It struck me how small it all looked from the outside. For years, I had let those walls define me, shrink me, convince me I was less. Yet here I was standing free, realizing the truth. A name doesn't carry weight unless you give it permission. Money can buy chandeliers, holiday dinners, even doctors willing to schedule futures. But money cannot purchase respect. It cannot erase betrayal, nor can it silence the voice that finally says enough. I turned back toward my car, knowing I didn't need to step through those gates again. Some legacies aren't worth inheriting. Some families aren't worth keeping. And sometimes the sharpest revenge isn't in breaking them, it's in walking away whole while they crumble under their own pride. So, if you think I made the right choice, comment right. If you believe you'd have handled it differently, share your idea below. Families and money always bring the sharpest lessons and sometimes the sweetest revenge.